My name is Regina DeMeo, and I'm a divorce attorney in the D.C. area. Over the last 14 years, I've seen a lot of issues that a lot of families have to deal with, and for the last 7 years, I've been a divorced single mother in this area, dealing with many of the same issues, including balancing a budget, dealing with co-parenting issues and different parenting styles. You name it, I've probably seen it, including sex addictions, drug addictions, alcoholism, you name it. So I decided that maybe over the next couple of segments we would have some interesting guests come on to have some open and honest discussions about what all families have to deal with. And my very first guest, I'm very happy to say, is Dr. Mary Atwater, who's been a psychologist here in the area for the last 15 years, helping families deal with all sorts of issues. Thank you, Mary, for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So I have some really interesting questions. I thought we'd start with in the first step, when a couple is getting together and they're going to move in together, if that's okay. So let's say, for example, you really don't like those Maxim magazines that your boyfriend has. And how do you have that kind of a conversation with somebody? Like, you need to get rid of those magazines, or I don't really like that artwork. Have you had to deal with these issues?
When couples move in together, they have to come up with a new way of living. They've lived independently, and now when they're living together, it's a clash of cultures. It's a clash of the history or the past. So they have to create a new beginning, and that does require some negotiation. So you'd want to be able to sit down and go over the list of things. It's kind of hard to put two households together, so could just be a space or capacity thing where you only have so much room, so some things do have to get thrown out. So how you make that decision is you negotiate, and that's a really important first step.
So I can imagine these would get very heated at times. Do you have any tips for people, like, rather than just having World War III break out, is there something that, should people make a list ahead of time?
That's a great point. I do ask couples to write down sort of what they value or what's important to them, so they're not saying, I don't want this, I don't want these magazines, or I don't want your old hockey stuff, or whatever it is, because the other person might feel pretty close to those items. It's more, we only have so much room, so we have to choose what's of value to you, what's of value to me, and then make that list together. I think compromise, negotiation is a very difficult first step, but it has to happen. So writing things down makes sense because you're putting it out there, what it is that you like or what it is that you value, rather than just assuming the other person would value what you do.
That makes sense. But, maybe because I'm Latin and I'm a hothead, I can imagine some people would get a little emotional during these conversations. So do you have tips for how people would stay calm?
It's okay to get upset. It's okay to get Latin. It's okay to be emotional. I think the other partner needs to know that that's who you are, and you get a little upset, but then you calm down. I mean, that's part of getting to know each other, is to know that the person that you love feels strongly about something, and don't take it personally as if it's about you. It's the other person's excited or very passionate about something, and so you have to. Good couplehood is waiting out the high emotions to get to the real issues at hand. Why you want something, what is it that how strongly you feel about something, rather than taking it personally that the other person got excited.
That makes sense. So it's more about trying to get to the understanding of why somebody feels a certain way, as opposed to sticking to your position, I just want this out of the house.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So once a couple moves in, there's some issues that tend to come up, I'm sure you've seen a ton. What are the most common issues that couples face once they move in together? Because I remember when I moved in with my ex-husband, those first 6 months were horrible. We fought about the towels on the floor. We fought about all sorts of things, not checking in with one another.
Right.
What are things you've seen?
Well, those are pretty good. If you think about two animals getting in the same space together, it gets territorial. So there's a space that's a we space, there's my space, there's your space. So people have to honor that. I mean, when you fall in love doesn't mean you want to spend every single minute together, and it doesn't assume that the other person's going to love everything that you love. But somewhere in the middle there is the place to negotiate that this is our space and this is my space. So that's part of it. It's just feeling comfortable because you can be on top of each other, or you can give each other enough space so that you can breathe and, you know, have a good relationship. But some of the items that come up are very typical, whether you're living together or you're married, and those are the basics that we all read about and hear about in magazines, TV shows, movies, sex, love, relatives, time together, time alone. Those are pretty much the kind of the hotter areas.
You've read Dr. Gottman's book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work? Mm-hmm. Do you like that book for couples to read?
Yeah, Gottman definitely has a good way of explaining how couples can think about how they feel about the relationship. I would add on to what Gottman does and get them to then show the other person how to do it. So Gottman's really good at breaking down that this person's more emotional than this person. So you kind of get an identification of the other person. But the next step is then for the other person to say what that looks like to feel loved. If you knew that I like for you to bring me a cup of coffee in the morning, that's a great thing, but you don't know to say good morning, thank you for the cup of coffee. Some communication between couples is mind reading, and you have to be able to say, I feel loved when you do this. So that's just a little extra on to Gottman that I do when I work with couples.
That sounds a lot like what Dr. Chapman writes about with the 5 love languages.
Love languages, exactly. We need to be able to tell the other person how to love us. And that's not easy. My parents didn't teach me that. There's no class in high school or college, I know, that teaches you how to love the other person. So it's difficult to be in a relationship, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things a lot of people think about in a romantic sort of way is, oh, if that person is my one and only, he should be able to read my mind.
He should know how to love me.
Right.
And the other person has no clue, so.
So you see this a lot?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So then do you help couples actually articulate, this is what I need in order to feel loved?
Right, and practice that, because it's awkward until it's not awkward. But that number one complaint is, if they loved me, they would do it this way. And I always say, how would they know? They didn't get that message or that memo, so you have to give it to them. And once is never enough. You can remind them. If somebody says something snarky, you just stop and say, what did you say? Or could you repeat that again? And then you give the other person time to go, okay, I didn't mean to come off snarky. I just meant to say I was disappointed.
Why do you think it is so hard to just have this conversation so nicely and openly and say, this is what I need in order to feel loved? What do you have any ideas of why it's so hard?
Life is pretty hectic. Living here in the DC area especially, it feels like there's a really fast pulse. Things just happen rather quickly. I think we get mindless and we're not paying attention in the moment to what's going on between someone. Because we've been, fast day, we have a lot on our mind, or we're not present, we're in the past or we're in the future, going in our heads. But couplehood, whether you're living together or you're married, requires that you be present with the other person.
So one thing that I've observed is I think dating is so much fun, right? it's you go on these great dates together, it's the honeymoon period, and then you move in together. Do you think that what happens is once people move in together, it's like, oh, I can check that off my list of things, now we're together, maybe they start taking each other for granted?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do a lot of work with acceptance and commitment therapy, and part of thinking about your relationship with anyone, whether it's your child, your parents, co-workers, or the love of your life, is you can have a goal to get married, to have children, to have a house. Those are goals, but they have to be based off of similar values. So I think a mistake is made early on in a relationship, dating relationship, that because we want the same things, we're going to live happily ever after. But if they don't have the same values, then you get a goal and you think, okay, now I'm supposed to be happy, but it's not the same as saying, I want to be in a loving, committed relationship. That's a lot different than moving in together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great point, yeah. And I think the other thing is, some couples, I find, their expectation is once you move in together, you'll do everything together, 24/7.
Right, that was the difference between my space, our space. Clearly defining that is important.
So what do you do with a couple where like one person is like, okay, we've moved in together, that was a goal, and now they want to kind of have their own space, and meanwhile the other person is like, wait, now we're together, we should do everything 24/7. How do you maneuver that?
Right. Well, I think I would encourage the person who wants to have some room to explain why that's of value to them. I personally would say I'm a much better mommy when I've had plenty of Mary time, enough time to, just be an individual, to be creative, to have fun with my friends. I come back refreshed, and then the mommy in me is just ready to go and be a mommy. I think it's also hard. We can't read each other's minds, so I like to make things very concrete. So sometimes I'll take a calendar. This is a good example. The wife thinks the husband plays too much golf, and the man thinks, oh, I don't play enough golf. So we get out a calendar, and I have a green magic marker, and I say, okay, you go over on the calendar and you circle all the days that you're playing golf. And when he does that, he instantly sees, wow, I play a lot of golf. So it's concrete there. There's not an argument between what she says and what he says. And then they get to start from there of like, how do we make sure that both person in the couplehood is feeling good about the time that they spend independently and the time that they spend together.
That's a great technique. So having a visual sometimes helps, like, put it together, because somebody else might say, well, you think I'm playing too much golf. I don't think I play enough golf. But then that's really a great technique to have.
Sure.
Would you do the same thing with like someone who's watching too much football, or maybe someone who's like addicted to working out too much? Do you see that happen also?
Right. When I'm dealing with couples who are not doing so well or getting headed for divorce, it comes down to one person feels like the other person's leaving the relationship because they're spending too much time golfing, or they're spending too much time with the television. They have a different relationship than the one that, say, the wife would say, you watch too much football. I don't know that the argument's really about football. I think it's about you're not spending enough time with me. So you have to shift the argument from what he's doing wrong to what's missing. So what is he not doing when he's busy on playing golf or busy watching television? He's not spending time with his wife, maybe, or with his kids. So you shift the argument back to a negotiation of, I feel alone when you're watching television. I feel abandoned when you're spending so much time with your friends. I want more of you comes across a lot better than you spend too much time, wagging the finger.
So it's almost like to get what you want, you have to actually be a little bit more vulnerable and be less attacking and less blaming.
Right. Right. Well, the blame shuts people down. They don't want to listen, and then there's no negotiation when you get down to a blame.
Makes sense. Okay, we're going to take a little break, and then we'll be right back. Thank you.
For you. Hey, Mom.
Girls, I used to cheer back in my day. Ready? Okay! Go team!
That was amazing. Mom, that was amazing.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Welcome back to Making It Last. I'm Regina DeMeo, a divorce attorney in the D.C. area, and with me is Dr. Mary Atwater, who's a psychologist that's been practicing for over 15 years. Thanks so much, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
So we were talking about, issues that couples have to deal with, right, when they're living together, and people may be spending too much time doing things that the other person doesn't agree with. Now, let's talk about, like when people start having drug problems or alcohol problems. How do you bring that up to your spouse and say, hey, I think you're drinking too much?
That's a big problem. I would add to that list spending too much time on the internet. It's any behavior that takes you away from doing something together as a couple. And as we mentioned in the last segment, couples have to come to some negotiation of how much time is an independent person's time and how much time is a couple time. So that's a disagreement that happens a lot. You're spending too much time, just fill in the blank, drinking, too much time with your friends, too much time on the internet. Any type of addiction is pulling, it's another relationship, so it pulls you out of the relationship. So couples argue about this all the time. Couples get divorced over these issues.
Do you see that a lot of times the person with the issue says that it's the other person's fault? Like, oh, I'm not the one that's drinking too much, you're just too sensitive. Or I'm not spending too much time on the internet, you're just, being a nag.
Right. Oh, that's a very good point. I think what plays out is if a woman is busy doing something, the man can easily say, she's too busy, so I'm going to go do this. And it can also be the opposite direction. He's too busy working, so I will get lost in drinking wine. It makes me feel good because I feel bad that he's not here with me. So it's not an issue just for one person. It's really a couple issue. But it's hard to admit that I'm scared or I'm lonely or I'm afraid. I'm afraid when you leave me that, our marriage is deteriorating. Those words don't come out, but the drinking might increase or some other addiction might come into play. But from my perspective, when I do couples work, it's that they're avoiding the relationship between them or just negotiating a better deal. They're just not happy. This doesn't feel like love when you do this or that. It's a really hard thing for a couple, for one person in the couple to say, or even for the other person to just show up and be available to love the other person the way that they need to be loved or the way that they want to be loved.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's common human behavior, right, to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
Exactly.
So speaking of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, so it's pretty common, and especially in the divorce world, to see a lot of couples that get divorced because there's an affair.
Okay.
Right. So, but not all couples actually get divorced when there's an affair. Have you dealt with couples that are dealing with infidelity?
Right.
So how do couples deal with that?
It's a tough problem, but it's not one that's insurmountable. There's plenty of research out there that says that they're not affairs don't happen necessarily because of something that's wrong in the marriage. It could be they are looking for something, extra or added. I mean, you really need to get to the understanding of how an affair could have happened in the first place. So that takes a lot of emotional,
it's like soul searching,
insight into what was going on before the affair happened. One of the couple, I'll just use a woman, I could easily use a man, a parent gets sick. So that person is busy caring for the children, caring for the sick parent, and leaving the husband or the wife sort of alone. And instead of saying, hey, I'm alone, what can we do about this? How can we remedy this? The other person might say, well, give me time and next week we'll have time together or something, just to negotiate even that. It seems insurmountable in some relationships to negotiate to get your needs met. And then it just becomes what Gottman calls a turn away. So instead of turning towards each other in a crisis or some member's sick or a child is sick, couples start to turn away from each other. And then affairs can happen because there's some distance between them. The closeness is lost.
Well, I don't feel like getting to the extreme of Lorena Bobbitt, right? I'm pretty sure I would not forget or forgive an affair, but I know that people do. How do they rebuild that trust?
Therapy is a good way to do that. In couples therapy,
so they can't do it alone, you don't think?
Well, I think it's hard. I think it would be hard for me too, and I'm a professional, because it's hard to be really objective about what the other person needs or how they're feeling. I don't think the affair would have happened if they could be connected to what the other person wants. So some of the basic couple work is to just ensure that everybody's on board with what the couple needs or what each individual person needs. Then it comes down to capacity. Sometimes we could want something from our spouse or from our loved one they're just not capable of giving. That goes back to the not blaming. You can't blame someone because they can't give you what you need. Maybe you can negotiate to get some of it, but couples have some illusion that the other person's supposed to give you everything that you need. That's not really human relationships. We're all, fallible. We all make mistakes. No one is perfect. So to expect the other person to just give you everything that you need, I think that's really tall order to ask anyone.
I've heard actually some people say that once you know what your needs are, it's actually your own job to fulfill your needs.
It's a pretty, what I recommend couples do, again, I like to put things on paper so that it's out there and it's concrete, is write down the things that you really feel that you need from your other partner. And then give that list to the other person. They might be able to say, I can give you this and this and this. Well, I'm not so sure I can give you this. That becomes a point of negotiation then. But it's an actual realization that the other person has limited resources or limited capacity, so they can't give you everything. And you're right. So whatever's left for you to still try to negotiate, it's up to you to decide, can I do this for me? Am I willing to do this for me so that I can stay married, so we can keep this relationship going? But that takes a lot of, emotional work of thinking about what it is that I need and then trying to negotiate for it.
And having realistic expectations. So when things do fall apart, you've worked as a divorce coach with couples, right?
Right.
And what are the most common issues that come up in the event that people are divorcing?
Well, like as we said before, sometimes it is an affair. And one person in the couple, and I've had women having affairs, men having affairs, it's not gender, it's pretty gender neutral. The person who had the affair, I think they need to be able to ask for forgiveness. I think they need to be able to explain how they wandered off and found someone else to fulfill the needs of the couplehood. But it's also up to the other person who was left or abandoned in the relationship to try and make something, to find a way to repair that. Some people just can't do that. They can't find a way to repair what they feel was broken or damaged in the couplehood. So it moves into the phase of divorce, which takes some time, as you know. It's not, you don't just decide to get a divorce one day and then you're divorced. There's a lot of things to go through. What I do with couples as a divorce coach is try to help them not blame each other, not be angry at each other, but to try to recognize the limits of the other person's capacity so that there can be some way of, maybe it's forgiveness, some people don't like that word, but maybe it's just a way of coming to some realization of, oh, you weren't capable of giving me what I need, and I kept asking you for it and you kept failing, so the relationship was really difficult. If I can get a couple to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses and the capacities, it makes a divorce, if it's going to happen, a lot more like a business deal that went bad. And some people don't like that, but marriage is a business. It's a merger of two companies, whether anybody likes to think of it that way or not.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's my job. My job is the business side of the divorce, right? But you're dealing with the emotional side. And so I have a tremendous amount of respect for what you do, because people who are emotional don't make very good legal decisions.
Right.
And where you come in is to hopefully calm people down. But how do you get people to get past the anger? Because, when someone finds out that 20 years are gone, right, and then there's not as much money as they thought there was, or, whatever the issue is, but people get very angry, and they sometimes get stuck on anger. How do you get them unstuck?
Off the top of my head, a same approach I would use with an individual that has a lot of anger is, how is that anger helping you get what you want? Getting people to recognize that anger could be like a 20-pound rock sitting in their lap, and they want their anger. They've got their anger, but they can't really do much with all that anger. They can't think correctly. They can't ask for repair. When you're sitting there with so much anger, it gets in the way of moving forward, of setting new goals or or living your values. I try to help people, I can't make the anger go away, but we can certainly move it to the side so that some work can be done of self-repair, getting your needs met, maybe with a different person. There's a lot. Anger gets in the way of people making good decisions. So I think that's a point to make, and people understand that.
What about depression? Because I see a lot of people, not necessarily that they're always depressed, but the situation is so depressing. They think their life is over. This is not what they expected in their 40s or 50s. And how do you help people who are depressed?
Depressed in the just normal depression, or depressed in the divorce situation?
In the divorce situation.
Right. Depression can be long-term or situational. So if it's long-term, I'm not there to help them as a divorce coach. They really need to have their own, doctors, therapists helping them with something that it's a lifelong struggle. In divorce coaching, I help explain that we all have pretty strong emotions during the divorce process, but they're not permanent. They're situational. They can come and they will go. It's an ebb and a flow. So it's not, you might think because I'm feeling this, it'll always be this way, but that's not necessarily true.
And how do you get people to focus beyond the depressing situation they're in to the fact that there is a bright future ahead, especially with kids? How do you get them to reframe?
Right. Another way to help couples, especially as a divorce coach, is to get the couple to decide what it is that they value. They might not value their relationship anymore, but every single couple that I've worked with, they really value that their kids grow up to be healthy, happy, good human beings, healthy human beings. So if I can get them to recognize that they still have that same value together, then we can establish some goals of the co-parenting together to keep that value ahead. The best interest of our children means that we cooperate. We speak kindly to each other. We show our children that we still care enough about each other so that they can feel comfortable with the divorce.
So basically you're teaching people that just because someone's a crappy spouse, they can still be a good parent.
I guess you could say it that way.
It's true. I obviously have a good co-parenting relationship with my ex, but we just did not make good roommates. And
okay.
I guess that's really what
maybe
we're trying to show people, right?
Right, but that could be that capacity model. You and he it didn't work for lots of reasons, but I don't like to blame or find fault. Right. Especially when you still have children, because those children are in the middle. So if you are denigrating one parent, you're really kind of dragging you're dragging your children through
right.
how bad the other parent is. So people have strengths and weaknesses. I always encourage parents to say, well, that's your mom or that's your dad, and they do some things well, and then they struggle, just like we all do.
You're right.
Just like children do. Children have strengths and weaknesses too. So it's a real human way of characterizing.
No, it's perfect. Thank you so much for coming on today.
I appreciate you having me.
If people want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
I am listed under Psychology Today, and I'm also listed with the Maryland Psychological Association.
And you have offices in both Bethesda and
Potomac. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much,
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Mary Atwater.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. See you next time on Making It Last.